All right, we have one last graphic we need to import, and this one's actually just for a bit of fun. Show it to you here briefly. I got a nutritional panel off the web and modified it a little bit to, be a little cooler than just nutritional stuff. Actually, it does have nutritional stuff in a way because it has some tea with caffeine, and of course, the sleep is very minuscule and the work hours are too high, which I'm sure a lot of us have experienced. So anyway, just a little bit of fun there. And we're going to be placing this on the bottom right hand corner of the left side of the box, right in here. And we have a material for that, but we're probably not going to be able to use it because in the modeling phase, the materials encompass the inside and outside of the box, and that would be the left side material. And to check that, let's go to the info and statistics panel and expand out the, oh, look, it's already expanded. Expand out the polygons, materials, and then we're going to select the left side mat. So just hit the plus next to that, and we can zoom in and take a look. And sure enough, yes, that's the in and outside of the box. So what we need to do is actually create a new selection set for this, and we'll select these polygons here and make ourselves that new selection set. We just want the outside of the box, and we'll go up to, oh, about right here, even though we're not going to be texturing that high. Okay, go to select, assign selection set. We're going to call this nutritional panel. All right. Now that we have that set, let's go back to the shader tree. We can drop that selection and we should go back into item mode, hold down shift, press the space bar, or just click on the button on the top left. And now for that selection set we just made, we need to make a group again. So let's go to add layer, group, and it looks like it was parented there. We don't want that, of course, but we do want it near the top, and we'll place this just above these sprinkled cherries because that's what we want. We want this panel to be above the sprinkled cherries, and we'll set the polygon tag type to selection set under the properties tab. Polygon tag will be nutritional panel. Okay, so now that we've taken care of that, we need to import our nutritional panel itself. So with that nutritional panel material group selected, let's go to add layer, image map, and load up that nutritional panel. You can see it's already applied and it appears to be backwards. And well, that might be because the UV map. Let's take a look. And yeah, it's automatically applied to the UV map. We'll set this to a planar projection along the X, which is going to stamp it along the side of the box here. The other thing we don't want is horizontal and vertical repeating, so we'll set this to reset. And the size is awfully large. If we zoom out, you can see it's quite large. Let's click this little circle icon, set it to equals. We'll set this to approximately 7 centimeters. That should scale it down quite nicely. But we should bring this out more toward the outside of the box so we can see it and select it. And we'll drag this on up so that way it's on the inside of the top and the bottom of the box, and then pull that more toward the front. It looks like the image is not aligned with our texture locator, and we can solve that by ticking world coordinates, and that will align the texture locator with the image. The other thing that I'm noticing is that it's stretched a little too much along the X, or I should say Z, really, since that's going to the front. And we'll scale this on down to get it more into the scale that I created this in. We'll move this back a little and down. So right there is the position I want, although it's still a little large. Let's scale this down a bit further. Zoom out, take a look. Yeah, that's about the size I want right there. Now we can move this down and to the right a little more. Right about there. And now we can address the wrong direction of the text. And we'll simply just rotate this on the Y 180 degrees. And that will flip that around to how we want it. All right, let's take a look in preview. You can still read the text. We barely want to be able to make out that large font there. It says the Foundry, and I can read that just fine. All right, yeah, it says the Foundry. That's great. Okay, so let's set up a bump map for this now. We'll right-click on this layer here, create an instance. Right-click on the diffuse layer for this and create an instance. And what I'm going to do just temporarily so that way we can see what's going on with the image is set this to displacement. That's under surface shading. And we'll set displacement. That's going to jump out quite a lot. And you can see that the black areas are not doing anything. They're actually staying right back at the box. And to make them jump out, we can edit the low value. We'll just set this to 100. So now the black and the white are exactly the same, and it's displacing them no differently than one another. Of course, the displacement's quite harsh, and that's not what we want. So what we need to do is go down to the material here, the base material, since there's no other material controlling it. And you can see the displacement is at 2 centimeters. And with the other bump maps that we've created, we have them at about 750 nanometers. Let's set that in the displacement value as well. So we'll type in 0.075, and that goes back to exactly where we want it. Looks like that has a little light catching action happening on the edge. Looks good. Now we can set that back to bump. What I like to do is sometimes you can't tell exactly what's happening with the bump, so setting it to displacement to troubleshoot can be helpful. All right, so now we have the bump, and what we can also do is set a spec map for this. And to make our lives easy, we'll duplicate this as well. We'll duplicate the bump layer, and we'll bring this down below the bump. Right click on the effect and set it to specular mount, which is under basic. And since we have the low value already set, the blacks are going to be the same specular amount as the white, which is exactly what we want. One thing we should do is change the opacity of the specular amount. We'll just set this to 2%, as we've done with all the other items with specularity. That way it's not too harsh or doesn't cause any blowouts with lights and so on. One last thing I want to do that I just noticed is that in the preview render, it's a little high on the box, and I want to move that down. Move it down to right about, well, let's wait for preview. Let's move it down a little bit lower, just a touch more numerical input here. So let's set this to 2.75 centimeters. It's a little low. Let's just click and drag here. Oop, there we are. So 2.85 is what we want. There we go. That looks more aligned how I want it there. So the distance from the right edge of this to the back is about the same as the bottom edge of the label as to the bottom of the box. We have one last thing we need to do in the shader tree, and that would be the cardboard coloring for the Boolean cutout and along the edges of the box. We actually have one issue that will come to light on the top of the box, which I like to leave in for videos. So you get a little bit of shader tree modeling issues popping up because they happen, right? And we also have an interesting area with the render boolean. That should be some fun. So let's get to it. First, create the material or selection set for the edge here. Let's go into element mode, and we'll be using polygons for this. Let's select these edges right here, and because the way I modeled this, if we hit L to select the loop, it goes all the way around the box here. So it's always a good idea to try and model with that kind of stuff in mind. If not, no big deal, just paint select, and instead of assigning a material, we'll assign a selection set. They're a little more versatile. And we'll call this one cardboard edges. Enter. Let's open up the box material in the shader tree and select it. Let's add a layer, and we'll add a group. Now this one, we do want to be on top of all the others, although realistically it would be underneath. But for our purposes, we'll just overlay it and it will look just fine. Now we need to assign this group to the selection set. So we'll change the polygon tag type to selection set and then polygon tag to cardboard edges. Now that we have that all set up, we need to create the colors for it. So with the cardboard edges group selected, add a layer. Let's go to textures, and we'll be using noise. And to make our lives a little bit easier, actually, let's move this above the cardboard edges just for now so it applies to everything. And we can hide the render boolean and the window for the boolean. And we can see what's going on a little bit better with this. In fact, let's just hide all of the other items here in the shader tree, so that way it renders a little more quickly. Right off, we should scale this to about, we'll say 1 millimeter. It's still a little bit large. Let's go 0.075, so 750 nanometers, and that's much better there. Let's go back to the texture layers. Let's edit the gain so that way the colors are a little more contrasting. So we'll go up to 80, And you can see that's a lot more contrast. In fact, let's go to 85 just to crank that up a little bit more. Now we'll change the colors. So for color 1, we want a dark brown, and we'll just up the value here and then find a good brown. Let's go more toward orange. All right, so we'll go right about here for that. We might tweak that a little bit, do some fine tuning. And for color number 2, we want this to be a slightly lighter orange. All right, so right about there. That's looking somewhat cardboard-like. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect since it's a very minor part of the box and it will barely be seen. We just want to add the extra little step to make it that much better. Now that we have that set up, we can just drag and drop this into the cardboard edges group, unhide the cardboard edges to make sure that it is being applied, and it is. The colors are a little bit light, so let's go ahead and adjust the value in the bar here a little bit of both the colors. Let's take a look. That's much better. All right, we'll stick with that for now. And you may have noticed the issue that I mentioned prior is actually a lot more visible now. The top of the box, if we zoom in the 3D viewport, is quite rounded and it needs an edge loop in there to harden it up to make it look a lot more like the edges over here and the rest of the box. And we'll be adding an edge loop along here to make that happen. So let's select these polygons here, hit Alt-C to activate the loop slice tool, and then we'll pull up the modeling panel here, and then we'll click in the viewport and we'll change the count to 1. And if we drag in the viewport, we can control the hardness of that edge now. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can get a better view of what's going on here. We don't want to be too close to the edge, otherwise it would be too hard. So if we move this over, we can see the slider panel. We want to be at about 95%, right about there. We can drop the tool with the spacebar, drop our selection by clicking in the viewport. And we can go back to item mode by hitting Shift Space. We can close out modeling panel. You can already see that edge is quite hard and it looks pretty good. So let's unhide all of the other layers other than cellophane. Take a look at what it's done for us. It's looking pretty good. You can see these corners here and over here, and the top of the box have that cardboard. Let's check our render boolean to make sure that it has it. And of course it shouldn't, because the render boolean actually is assigning its own surface or material. So if we go to the render boolean, you can see here this tick box that says local shader. And what it's doing is it's assigning the material from the window boolean object to that cutout. The way that we can apply this cardboard material to that is to make a new material for that item. So let's go ahead and add a layer. It's going to be a group. We'll keep this in the box group for now. And under the properties tab, we'll change the item to be the window boolean. All right, so we've got that set up. What we need to do now is get the noise from the cardboard edges into the window boolean. And the easiest way to do this is to instance this noise layer here and drag it up. And the reason we're instancing this is so that way we can edit just the one noise and affect all the instances that we create. So you can see it's still not applying anything to it. And that's because we have this window boolean layer parented to the box. So let's drag this out and put it above. And now you can see those edges are brown, just like the others on the box. So that's good, but now at the shader level, say we wanted to control that. If we hit compute shading, you can see those edges, and we don't want that. We want those edges to be controlled with this shader without having to set up two shaders, for example, for just one box. What we need is a new group. We'll go ahead and make a new group. Make sure that this is at the root of your scene. We'll call this box master, and we'll collapse the box and the window boolean. We'll drag and drop both of those into the box. And what we also need is the base shader to be above both of those child groups of the box master. So now when we try to control anything at the shader level, we have control of all of those materials at the same time. We have one last part that we need to assign the selection set to for the cardboard. And that's right here in the center area of the hole for the hook. Now, I also noticed that the edge, if we zoom on in, is a bit round. And let's go into polygon mode here by clicking the little box up there. And if we select this, you can see that it's one continuous polygon from the front to the back, which means we need to harden this edge up. So we'll do this on the front and back. Select these polygons in here, hit L to select the loop. Let's repeat that on the front. And now we'll use the loop slice tool. We'll click in the viewport. We're going to place this at right around 5%. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see that's pretty hard edged, but not too terribly hard. So it looks more or less like cardboard. All right, now that we've done that, we can assign our selection set to the inside. So let's select those two polygons, tell them to make a loop, and let's assign this a selection set. So go to select, assign selection set, and from the dropdown, select cardboard edges. Hit OK. Drop the selection by painting outside of the mesh. Go back to item mode and back to the render tab. And now you can see right in here that the cardboard has been applied. We have a few more things to implement with the cardboard material. We need to create a bump layer, we need to create a speck layer, and we're also going to add in another layer to control the diffuse amount. Then lastly, we need to put in a material to control all the aforementioned layers. So right off, let's hold down the shift key, and if you're using a mouse, you can use your scroll wheel. If you're using a Wacom tablet, you can use your scroll wheel as well. If you're using a newer Wacom tablet anyway. I'm going to zoom in to right about here. Now the cardboard right here, of course, is kind of bland looking. So let's add those materials we were talking about. And to do this, we're going to be using instances of the noise that we have here. So if we right click instance, right click on the effect, we're going to set this to diffuse amount. And you'll notice right away that it immediately darkens quite a lot. That's because these colors are being converted to grayscale, similar to what we were doing previously with the other texture images. Now, it's a little harsh. Let's scale this on down to about 45%. I think that will do us. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's duplicate the instance that we just made, and we'll set this one to bump. That's under surface shading, bump. And now we don't have any material to control the bump. So what we need to do is add one. Let's add a layer. Click on material. We need to put this on the bottom of the material group that we have here. Otherwise, of course, it will override any other colors, which you can see in preview right now. It's currently gray. We don't want that. Right. So now that we have a material, we can control the bump amplitude of this area by itself. And you can also see that it has a specular amount. Inside preview, you can see those highlights. Well, we'll tackle that in a moment. First, let's address the bump amplitude. And actually, the default of 200 nanometers that I have is exactly what I want. So we'll just stick with that. Now for the specular amount, it's currently at 20. And we want to get close to 0, but we don't want absolute 0. So let's go with 0.5. And that's going to give it a very little amount of specularity. Now we also want to up the roughness, which is basically the glossiness, and that will disperse the speck hit a little bit further out than if the value were lower. And that should do us for the material settings, other than that we need to change the diffuse amount for the material up to 100%, and we need to change the diffuse color to white. The reason we're doing that is because if we need to, at any point in time, set the blend mode to anything other than normal, for example, multiply, we want the underlying colors to be unmodified. Let's go ahead and do that just to demonstrate what will happen. Set this to multiply. You can see nothing is happening, of course, and the reason is because the diffuse color here is actually overriding that. You turn that off, and you'll see that it's actually picking out the underlying green, which we don't want in this case. But if you did need to modify the blending mode for any reason, this is how you'd want to set it up, as we've done previously. Let's turn all of these back on. Hold down Shift and scroll out with your scroll wheel. And now we have that more or less complete. However, the Boolean cutout right here is not getting any of those changes at all. And we need to copy or duplicate all of those layers that we just created for the bump, diffuse amount, and the base material, and instance those on over to the window Boolean. So we'll hold down Control and then click on all three of these, right click, and create instance. Now that we have these, we can drag and drop them up into our window Boolean group. Okay, make sure they get into that group. And let's place them in the exact same order that we have those materials in the cardboard edges group. So that way, if we go between them, they're in the exact same order. It'll be a little bit easier to troubleshoot. So bump is on the top, diffuse amount is in the middle, and diffuse color is on the bottom. And now you can see those changes are on that Boolean cutout.